The lush, emerald forests of Kael'Rath shimmered under the twin suns, their light filtering through the dense canopy to dapple the ground in gold and amber. The air was thick with the scent of blooming star vines and the distant hum of the planet's crystalline rivers. Here, the dragon cats reigned supreme, their sleek, scaled forms gliding effortlessly through the trees, their eyes glowing with an ancient intelligence. They were a paradox, creatures of both grace and ferocity, their dragon-like wings folded neatly against their backs as they moved with feline precision. At the heart of their society was Kael'Rath's capital, Vy-Arshan, a city of towering spires and organic architecture that seemed to grow from the earth itself. It was here that the Council of Claws convened, their voices low and resonant as they debated the future of their kind. Among them was Zira, the youngest counselor in generations, her scales a deep, iridescent blue that caught the light like polished sapphires. She was known for her sharp mind and even sharper tongue, a rarity in a culture that valued patience and deliberation. Beside her sat Thalrock, the elder statesman. His once vibrant crimson scales now faded to a muted rust. His voice carried the weight of centuries, and his wisdom was often the final word in any debate. Across the table was Vera, the warrior queen, her emerald-green eyes scanning the room with a predator's intensity. She was the embodiment of the dragon cat's martial prowess, her every movement a reminder of their species' dominance in the galaxy. The council chamber was alive with tension, the air thick with the scent of ozone from the holographic displays that floated above the central table. The topic at hand was the plague, a creeping, insidious blight that had begun to ravage the outer forests. It started with the star vines, their luminous petals withering to ash, and soon spread to the fauna, leaving behind skeletal remains and barren landscapes. The plague had no name, no known cure, and its origins were a mystery. Zira leaned forward, her claws tapping against the table in a rhythmic staccato. "We cannot afford to wait," she said, her voice cutting through the murmurs. "Every moment we spend debating is another acre of forest lost, another village abandoned." Thalrock raised a gnarled hand, silencing her. "Haste leads to ruin, Zira. We must consider all possibilities before acting. The plague may be a natural phenomenon, or it may be the work of an enemy. We cannot risk provoking a conflict without evidence." Vera's tail flicked impatiently. "Evidence? Our people are dying, Thalrock. If this is the work of an enemy, they have already declared war. We must strike before they grow bolder." The debate raged on, each counselor presenting their arguments with passion and conviction. Zira's mind raced as she listened, her thoughts a whirlwind of frustration and determination. She had seen the devastation firsthand, had stood amidst the ruins of a once thriving village and felt the weight of their helplessness. She knew they needed more than words, they needed action. As the suns dipped below the horizon, casting the chamber in a dim, amber glow, the council reached a decision. They would send an envoy to the neighboring systems, seeking aid and information. Zira was chosen to lead the mission, her youth and vigor seen as an asset in the face of the unknown. Vera would accompany her, her combat expertise a necessary safeguard. Thalrock remained behind, his role to maintain order and oversee the efforts to contain the plague. The journey to the edge of their territory was fraught with tension. The starship, a sleek vessel of organic design, glided silently through the void, its hull shimmering with bioluminescent patterns. Zira stood at the helm, her eyes fixed on the swirling vortex of hyperspace. Vera approached, her presence a steadying force. "You carry the weight of our people," she said, her voice low. "But you do not carry it alone." Zira nodded, her claws tightening around the control panel. "I know, but if we fail—" "We will not fail," Vera interrupted, her tone firm. "The dragon cats have faced extinction before, and we have always prevailed. This is no different." Their first stop was the human colony of New Terra, a bustling hub of trade and diplomacy. The humans were a young species, their technology crude compared to the dragon cats, but they had a reputation for adaptability and ingenuity. Zira had studied their history, their rapid rise from a single planet to a burgeoning interstellar power. She was both intrigued and wary, unsure of what to expect. The meeting took place in the colony's central hall, a stark contrast to the organic elegance of Vyrshan. The humans were represented by Commander Elias Kane, a tall, broad-shouldered man with piercing blue eyes and a demeanor that radiated confidence. Beside him stood Dr. Lin Mei, a scientist whose reputation for solving impossible problems had reached even the dragon cat's ears. Zira wasted no time, her voice carrying the urgency of her mission. "We seek your aid," she said, her gaze locking with Kane's. "Our world is dying, and we believe the plague may be the work of an enemy. We need your technology, your knowledge, to uncover the truth." Kane leaned back, his expression unreadable. "And what do we gain in return?" Vera's eyes narrowed, a low growl rumbling in her throat. "Your survival," she said, her tone icy. "If this plague spreads, it will not stop at our borders. Your colonies will be next." The room fell silent, the weight of her words hanging in the air. Dr. May stepped forward, her voice calm but firm. "We will help you," she said, her gaze shifting between Zira and Vera. "But we need to understand what we're dealing with. Bring us samples of the plague, and we will do everything in our power to find a solution." The agreement was struck, but Zira couldn't shake the feeling of unease that settled in her chest. The humans were allies for now, but she knew better than to trust too easily. As they prepared to return to Kael'Rath, she couldn't help but wonder if they were already too late. The starship emerged from hyperspace, the familiar glow of Kael'Rath's twin suns greeting them like an old friend. But as they approached the planet, Zira's heart sank. The once vibrant forests were now a patchwork of decay, the plague spreading faster than anyone had anticipated. She clenched her fists, her claws digging into her palms. They had to act now, before there was nothing left to save. As the ship descended, Zira turned to Vera, her voice steady despite the turmoil within. "This is just the beginning," she said. "We will find the truth, no matter the cost." Vera nodded, her emerald eyes blazing with determination. "For Kael'Rath," she said, her voice a low growl. "For the dragon cats." The ship touched down, and the two stepped out into the fading light, their resolve unshakable. The battle for their world had begun, and they would not rest until victory was theirs, or until the last of their kind had fallen. The air in Vyrshan was thick with the acrid scent of decay, a bitter reminder of the plague's relentless advance. Zira stood at the edge of the city's central plaza, her sapphire scales dulled by the ash that fell like snow from the darkened sky. The once thriving capital was now a shadow of its former self, its spires crumbling and its streets eerily silent. The dragon cats who remained moved with a haunted urgency, their eyes hollow and their tails low. Zira clenched her fists, her claws digging into her palms as she surveyed the devastation. Time was running out. Beside her, Vera's emerald scales glinted faintly in the dim light, her posture rigid with barely contained fury. "The humans had better deliver," she growled, her voice a low rumble that echoed through the empty plaza. "If they betray us." "They won't," Zira interrupted, though her tone lacked conviction. She had seen the calculating look in Commander Kane's eyes, the way Dr. May had hesitated before agreeing to help. The humans were not to be trusted, but they were their only hope. "We need them," she added, more to herself than to Vera. "For now." The sound of footsteps broke the silence, and Thalrock emerged from the shadows, his rust-colored scales blending with the ash-covered ground. His once proud frame was hunched, his movements slow and deliberate. "The plague has reached the southern forests," he said, his voice heavy with grief. "The villages there, they're gone, wiped out." Zira's heart sank, but she forced herself to remain composed. "We'll stop it," she said, her voice steady. "The humans are working on a solution. We just need to hold on a little longer." Thalrock's eyes narrowed, his gaze piercing. "And if they fail? What then, Zira? Will you lead us to our extinction?" The question hung in the air, a weight too heavy to bear. Zira opened her mouth to respond, but before she could, a low hum filled the air, growing louder with each passing second. The three dragon cats turned their gaze skyward, their eyes widening as a human starship descended through the ash-filled clouds. It was smaller than their own vessels, its angular design a stark contrast to the organic curves of Kael'Rath's architecture. Zira's pulse quickened as the ship touched down, its engines whining to a halt. The hatch opened with a hiss, and Commander Kane stepped out, his blue eyes scanning the desolate landscape with a mixture of awe and horror. Dr. May followed close behind, her expression unreadable as she clutched a data pad to her chest. Zira approached them, her claws flexing involuntarily. "You're late," she said, her voice sharp. Kane raised an eyebrow, his lips curling into a faint smirk. "Nice to see you too," he replied, his tone dripping with sarcasm. "We've been working nonstop. This isn't exactly a simple problem to solve." Dr. May stepped forward, her voice calm but firm. "We've made progress," she said, her gaze locking with Zira's. "But we need more time. And more samples." Zira's tail flicked impatiently. "Time is the one thing we don't have. The plague is spreading faster than we anticipated. If you can't help us, then we can help," Dr. May interrupted, her tone leaving no room for argument. "But we need to understand the source of the plague. It's not natural. Someone, or something, created it." The words sent a chill down Zira's spine. She had suspected as much, but hearing it confirmed was another matter entirely. "Who?" she demanded, her voice low and dangerous. Kane exchanged a glance with Dr. May before answering. "We don't know, but whoever it is, they're targeting your species specifically. This plague is designed to kill dragon cats and nothing else." The revelation hung in the air, a silent storm brewing. Vera stepped forward, her emerald eyes blazing. "Then we find them," she snarled, her claws unsheathed. "And we make them pay." Thalrock placed a restraining hand on her shoulder, his voice calm but firm. "Revenge will not save us," he said. "We must focus on survival. If the humans can help us, then we must let them." Zira nodded, though the weight of the situation pressed heavily on her chest. "What do you need?" she asked, her gaze shifting between Kane and Dr. May. "Access to your archives," Dr. May replied, "and permission to study the plague up close. The more we know, the faster we can find a solution." Zira hesitated, her instincts screaming at her to refuse. The archives contained the history and secrets of her people, knowledge that had never been shared with outsiders. But what good were secrets if her people were extinct? "Fine," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "But if you betray us—" "We won't," Kane said, his tone uncharacteristically serious. "You have my word." The words offered little comfort, but Zira had no choice. She led the humans to the archives, her every step weighed down by the gravity of her decision. The archives were housed in the heart of VY Arshan, a vast chamber filled with holographic records and ancient texts. Dr. May's eyes lit up as she entered, her fingers flying across her data pad as she began her work. Kane lingered near the entrance, his gaze sweeping the room with a mixture of curiosity and unease. Hours passed, the silence broken only by the occasional hum of machinery and the soft rustle of pages. Zira watched from the shadows, her mind racing as she tried to piece together the puzzle. Who would want to exterminate the dragon cats? And why? The questions gnawed at her, their answers just out of reach. Finally, Dr. May looked up, her expression grim. "I've found something," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "The plague. It's not just a biological weapon. It's a message." Zira stepped forward, her claws flexing. "What kind of message?" Dr. May hesitated, her gaze shifting to Kane before she answered. "It's a warning, a declaration of war. Whoever created this plague wants you to know that they're coming. And they won't stop until every last dragon cat is dead." The words struck like a physical blow, the room spinning as Zira struggled to process their meaning. Vera's growl echoed through the chamber, her emerald eyes blazing with fury. "Then we fight," she said, her voice a low snarl. "We fight until our last breath." Zira nodded, her resolve hardening. "We fight," she agreed, her voice steady. "But not alone. The humans will help us. and together we will find the ones responsible. Kane stepped forward, his expression unreadable. You have our support, he said, his tone solemn. But this won't be easy. Whoever we're up against, they're powerful. And they're not going down without a fight. Zira met his gaze, her sapphire eyes burning with determination. Then we'll be ready, she said. For Kael'Rath. For the dragon cats. The room fell silent, the weight of their shared resolve filling the air. The battle ahead would be long and brutal, but they would face it together. For their survival, for their future, and for the legacy of the dragon cats. The war room was a stark contrast to the organic elegance of Vyrshan's archives. Its walls were lined with holographic displays, their flickering lights casting eerie shadows across the faces of those gathered. Zira stood at the center, her sapphire scales reflecting the cold glow of the screens. Around her, the leaders of the dragon cats and their human allies debated strategies, their voices a cacophony of urgency and desperation. The plague had spread to the northern forests, its tendrils creeping ever closer to the heart of their civilization. Time was no longer a luxury, it was a dwindling resource. Commander Kane leaned over the central table, his fingers tracing the lines of a holographic map. We've identified the source of the plague, he said, his voice cutting through the noise. It's coming from the Zephyr Nebula, just beyond your borders. Our scouts detected a massive energy signature there, something artificial. Zira's claws flexed, her mind racing. The Zephyr Nebula was a desolate region, devoid of life and resources. Why would anyone choose it as a base? What kind of energy signature? She asked, her tone sharp. Dr. May stepped forward, her data pad clutched tightly in her hands. It's a signal, she explained, her voice trembling with excitement. A signal that matches the frequency of the plague. Whoever created it is using the nebula as a relay station, broadcasting the plague across your territory. Vera's emerald eyes narrowed, her tail flicking impatiently. Then we destroy it, she said, her voice a low growl. We take our fleet, wipe out the station, and end this. Kane shook his head, his expression grim. It's not that simple. The station is heavily fortified, and our scans indicate it's protected by a fleet of unknown origin. We'd be walking into a trap. Zira's gaze shifted to Thalrock, who stood silently at the edge of the room. His rust-colored scales seemed to blend with the shadows, his expression unreadable. What do you think? She asked, her voice softer than she intended. Thalrock's eyes met hers, their depths filled with a mixture of sorrow and resolve. We have no choice, he said, his voice heavy with the weight of centuries. If we do nothing, we will perish. If we fight, we may still perish, but at least we will have tried. The room fell silent, the truth of his words settling over them like a shroud. Zira straightened, her sapphire scales shimmering with determination. Then we fight, she said, her voice steady. But we do it smart. We need a plan. Kane nodded, his blue eyes gleaming with a hint of admiration. Agreed. We'll divide our forces. One team will attack the station head-on, drawing their attention. The other will infiltrate from the rear, disabling their defenses and shutting down the signal. Vera's lips curled into a feral grin. I'll lead the frontal assault, she said, her tone leaving no room for argument. Let them see the fury of the dragon cats. Zira hesitated, her instincts screaming at her to protest. Vera was their greatest warrior, but the mission was suicidal. Are you sure? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Vera's emerald eyes met hers, their intensity unwavering. I've lived my life as a warrior, she said. If this is how I die, then so be it. But I will not go quietly. The words struck a chord deep within Zira, her chest tightening with a mixture of pride and grief. She nodded, her claws flexing. Then we move at dawn. Prepare your teams. The hours that followed were a blur of activity. The dragon cats and humans worked side by side, their differences set aside in the face of a common enemy. Zira moved among them, her presence a steadying force. She checked weapons, reviewed strategies, and offered words of encouragement, her sapphire scales a beacon of hope in the darkness. As dawn approached, the fleet assembled above Kael'Rath, their ships gleaming in the pale light of the twin suns. Zira stood on the bridge of her flagship, her eyes fixed on the horizon. Beside her, Kane and Dr. May monitored the holographic displays, their expressions tense. "We're ready," Kane said, his voice breaking the silence. "On your command." Zira took a deep breath, her claws digging into the control panel. "For Kael'Rath," she said, her voice steady. "For the Dragon Cats." The fleet surged forward, their engines roaring as they entered hyperspace. The journey to the Zephyr Nebula was brief but fraught with tension. As they emerged from the void, the station came into view, a massive, angular structure surrounded by a swarm of enemy ships. Vera's voice crackled over the comms, her tone fierce. "Engage!" The battle was chaos. Laser fire lit up the void, the explosions casting eerie shadows across the nebula's swirling gases. Vera's ship led the charge, its weapons blazing as it carved a path through the enemy fleet. Zira watched from the bridge, her heart pounding as she coordinated the infiltration team's approach. "We're in position," Kane said, his voice tight with tension. "Moving in." The infiltration team slipped through the chaos, their ship cloaked as they approached the station's rear. Zira's claws flexed as she monitored their progress, her breath catching as they breached the station's defenses. Inside, the team moved quickly, their footsteps echoing through the sterile corridors. Dr. May's fingers flew across her data pad as she located the signal source. "There," she said, pointing to a massive console. "Shut it down, and the plague stops." Kane nodded, his hands moving swiftly as he input the commands. The console sparked and hissed, its lights flickering before going dark. "It's done," he said, his voice filled with relief. But their victory was short-lived. The station shuddered, its systems failing as alarms blared. "We need to go," Kane said, his tone urgent. "Now!" The team sprinted back to their ship, the station collapsing around them. As they launched into the void, the station exploded in a blinding flash of light, its destruction taking much of the enemy fleet with it. Zira's heart soared as she watched the explosion, but her joy was tempered by the sight of Vera's ship, engulfed in flames. "Vera!" she cried, her voice breaking. Vera's voice crackled over the comms, her tone calm despite the chaos. "It's been an honor," she said, her words barely audible over the static. "For Kael'Rath." The ship exploded, its fragments scattering across the nebula. Zira's claws dug into the control panel, her chest heaving as she fought back tears. "We did it," she whispered, her voice trembling. "But at what cost?" The fleet returned to Kael'Rath, their victory bittersweet. The plague had been stopped, but the cost had been high. Zira stood on the surface of her homeworld, her sapphire scales shimmering in the light of the twin suns. The forests were still scarred, but the air was clear, the scent of decay replaced by the faint promise of renewal. Kane approached, his expression solemn. "We'll help you rebuild," he said, his voice soft. "You're not alone." Zira nodded, her gaze fixed on the horizon. "Thank you," she said, her voice steady. "But this is just the beginning. The ones who did this are still out there, and we will find them." Kane's lips curled into a faint smile. "Then we'll be ready," he said. "Together." Zira's claws flexed, her sapphire eyes burning with determination. The battle had been won, but the war was far from over. For Kael'Rath, for the Dragon Cats, and for the future they would fight to protect.